we're part of an industry that is ever changing. I think we're constantly sort of reinventing ourselves. So it's sort of like finding that balance between, not being afraid to challenge your product or your business model or your brand continuously, but at the same time also making sure that you're not throwing everything out.
Welcome to the AttractionPros podcast, where we discuss the latest trends and challenges facing the attractions industry today.
We chat with some of the top leaders in the field and provide resources that will help develop your career in this great industry.
I am Josh Liebman, founder of BackLooper. I help attractions collect guest feedback and identify top priorities needed for improvement.
And I'm Matt Heller, founder of Performance Optimist Consulting. I help leaders lead so they can increase employee engagement and retention.
Now sit upright, hold on tight, and get ready for the AttractionPros podcast. Matt Heller, how's it going?
Josh Liebman, it's fantastic. How are you?
I was thinking before we recorded this today that maybe I need a signature catchline, catchphrase too, I'm kind of jealous of yours.
Well, come up with something and just do it consistently, because I got nothing else to say. So just do it consistently and it'll catch on.
I'll have to think of something that I could work in.
There you go.
Matt, do you ever think some days that, we're just a couple of those crazy nerds in this amusement industry?
Every single day. Yes. Honestly, that's what started this podcast, because we are crazy nerds that love this industry. And, it's one of the things that comes up quite a bit in our conversations, not only you and I, but with a lot of our guests. So yeah, I absolutely think that.
I think that too. And you're right. We probably wouldn't have started this podcast if we weren't. But, I think we've done a really good job of walking that line, that we didn't just turn this into a total enthusiast podcast. I know we've completely derailed our conversation a couple of times and just nerded out for a while. And to those listening, thank you for bearing with us during those episodes. But I think overall, it really is what drives the passion for so many people in the industry. And today's guest, Andreas Andersen, is no exception to that. And he definitely is one of those crazy nerds as well.
Yeah. And I think he even calls himself that. But what I'm really interested to talk to him about is, he's been obviously very involved with IAAPA and very kind of high profile. And he's talked about a lot of things and done a lot of presentations. But it's also interesting to talk to him about sort of his background and what got him into the industry, and, just his focus where he is at Liseberg, because he's been there for almost 10 years, and how that really, has changed over the years, and what some of those things are that he's really proud of, and the things that, maybe he wouldn't do again.
Yeah, absolutely. And just a side note is that recently at the IAAPA Expo virtual conference, Andreas was the closing keynote for the conference. And if you haven't had a chance to watch it, it's still on demand up until the end of the year. So if you're still listening to this in 2020, definitely go to iapa.org/expo education. And I believe you can still register for it and watch all the sessions on demand, including ours. You can watch ours if you'd like as well. You did an awesome CEO Speaks and also a breakout session too. But Andreas's session where he talked about change in the industry. And that's going to be one of the things that we talk about. I would say maybe expanding on a number of the things that he mentioned in the keynote, and talking about things like social changes, public perception. What is it that your guests are saying, what they're expecting in terms of change, and also just, the future of the industry. Liseberg is currently in the process of developing their 30-year plan. So being able to talk to Andreas of saying, what does it look like of having to look so far into the future where we don't know what the world is going to look like. So it'll be really great to hear his thoughts and messages on all that. And we have a great interview lined up for today.
Let's get to it.
Let's get to it. Andreas Andersen, welcome to the Attraction Pros podcast. We are so excited to have you here today. First and foremost, how are you?
I'm okay, and thank you for inviting me. These are strange times, but I'm hanging in there.
Yeah, absolutely.
How are
Well,
you doing?
we're just about the same. It's been kind of funny that, throughout the whole time, we haven't figured out quite how to answer that question of how you doing, because normally it's just the, fine, how are you? And
but we keep asking for some reason.
Yeah. Yeah. So Andreas, I feel like we have a lot of ground to cover. We're really excited for this interview with you today. But before we get started, can you just give us just a quick background of yourself and your time in the industry?
Sure. I've been in the industry for about 20 years. I originally have a background as a lawyer, and I also or a law degree, and I also worked. I worked at the Danish Ministry of Finance. I also have a background in economics or financial background. And then in 2000, I got a job as a company lawyer at Tivoli in Copenhagen. And I guess since then, I've sort of been part of the industry, first at Tivoli for a number of years. Then I actually joined IAPA and sort of restarted their European office back in 2008 in Brussels. And then since 2011, I've been with Liseberg, more or less the whole time.
That's awesome. So I'm curious, because I didn't know about the lawyer background. So how has that helped in what you're doing now, running Liseberg?
Not much. No, I mean I wasn't a particularly good lawyer, I have to say. I mean, I just went to law school because my father was, he was a lawyer, and it was sort of a family thing. But I didn't really enjoy it, and I think when you don't enjoy doing a thing, you're not really good at it, and that was the case for me. So I have to say that I've probably mostly used my financial background for the last let's say 17, 18 years. And the thing is, law also get very quickly outdated. So I don't think you would want me to really work with that today, to be frank.
Sure. So what drove you to want to work at Tivoli and then become involved in IAPA and then end up at Liseberg? Where did the connection into the amusement industry come from?
I'm one of those crazy nerds that that have been stalking the industry before I actually became part of the industry. It's a funny story, because I've always been really fascinated by amusement parks and roller coasters and stuff like that, rides. And I thought I really thought I was the only one in the world that had this crazy interest. But then when the internet came along in the mid-90s, I realized, oh my God, there's this huge subculture, and there's a European coaster club, and they were doing magazines and trips and stuff like that. So I actually sort of found or refound my joy for visiting amusement parks in the mid-90s, and therefore I kind of had I was always surfing around Tivoli's webpage. I was sort of like figuring out, what was going on, and then when a job became vacant that sort of matched my profile, I applied for it and I got it. And so it's an interest or a hobby that sort of became, you could say, a way of living or a career.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so now I'm going to ask you the same question about lawyering. How is that enthusiast background or that love of the industry? And I kind of think I know where you're going to go with this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. How does that help you in running Liseberg?
Well, I think, again, I think you very often get good at things you like doing, and I do like the industry. I mean, I do like the product. I like working with, creating some of the best memories of you know of your childhood, or really just working with happy people. You know, I really enjoy what we're doing, but I think it has also shifted a little bit in the sense that to begin with, you know, when I came to the industry, I was very fascinated by, you know, the rides and glitz and the glamour and the shows and everything. And sure enough, I do enjoy that today as well. But today is more about the people. I mean, I like, of course, my colleagues, like my guests. I also like, you could say, the whole attractions community. I always call it my attractions family, because I do feel there is some very special connection between us. I think we're all sort of made a little bit the same way, or wired a little bit the same way, and I really enjoy that. So I think that interest has sort of, you know, it drives involvement, and it drives excitement. But I think today it's probably a little bit more about the people I work with in various, you know, contexts.
Sure. Yeah. So, Andreas, one of the things that you mentioned in your recent keynote at the IAAPA Expo virtual education conference, well, first of all, there were many things that came out of that were just huge, I would say, light bulb moments, or just moments of inspiration. So I thought it was fantastic. One of the things you said that I believe was near the beginning of the talk was that your role at Liseberg balances being a custodian on one hand and a change agent on the other. And I know that really, I would say, kind of set up the rest of the talk there, but curious as far as what that balance really means.
I think when you work in a company that is old, you know, and Liseberg is almost 100 years old. I mean, we'll be 100 in 2023. I think there is always that fine balance between really making sure that you got, you could say, the basics, the DNA of the product. You make sure that, you know, you're not throwing anything out that is you know is a valuable part of the brand. But on the other hand, I think we're part of an industry that is ever changing. You know, I think we're constantly sort of reinventing ourselves. So it's sort of like finding that balance between, you know, not being afraid to challenge your product or your business model or your brand continuously, but at the same time also making sure that you're not throwing everything out. And I think that can be a little bit tricky sometimes. And sometimes I also say that I'm not sure I always keep the best. I mean, sometimes I'm probably a little bit too, you know, I don't know. I may be actually changing too much if I sort of look back at the last 10 years or 9 years of my career. But it is this time, and I think that everybody it can work in an old company, they will recognize that. You know, I think if you asked this, you know, people work with this, they would say the same thing. You know, it's about making sure you take care of the heritage, but at the same time, you also challenge that heritage continuously.
And I'm guessing that you have guests that are trying to keep that heritage alive and may even bristle at some of the changes or some of the modernization maybe that's happening. So it's not only probably just from your viewpoint of the product, but also, you know, keeping your guests happy and bringing them along for the journey.
Mm. Yeah, and you know, it's interesting because I think that if I look back at especially my early years at Liseberg, I really took quite a beating sometimes, you know, when we did something that was not looked upon as on brand with Liseberg, or that was where change was too, you know, just felt too radical. But I think that I think I went to a pretty hard school with Tivoli, because we always joke that you couldn't move a bench in Tivoli without somebody getting upset. And I think, I've talked to, Disney executives, especially people working at Disneyland in California. It's a little bit the same thing. Everybody that really has an investment in that park, the locals, the regulars, the pass holders, they do get really upset if you're changing too much. And I think that applies actively, and that certainly also applies to these different. So it's, sometimes you succeed, sometimes you have to maybe back up a little bit.
Yeah, I know. I know at Disneyland they talk about that's where Walt walked. And so a lot of times you have the traditional feeling of, well, Walt wanted that bench there, so we can't move that, right? So I definitely hear what you're saying there. I'd like to also ask a little bit about kind of where Liseberg is now and some of those changes that you've made. What are the ones that you think are the most long-lasting or that you're proudest about? And then even on the other side, what are some of those lessons that you've learned that maybe, hey, don't think I would do that again?
Oh, that's a really good question. I mean, I think, when you have a job like mine, you're very often being judged by either the things you built or the financial results you create. That's sort of the two, primary KPIs. You're being judged by. And sure enough, I mean, we have a very robust financial situation. I mean, not this year. I mean, obviously we're closed, but normally we have we're in good shape financially, and I'm very proud of that. And I'm also very proud of the things that I've built, whether it's new rides or it's new areas or whatever. But the thing I'm actually mostly proud about is not the rides or the results, but it's the organizational journey. Because I think that's a tough one, and I always say that when I came to Liseberg, I was the 6th CEO in almost 100 years, and that sort of illustrates that of course it's a very attractive job to be CEO of Liseberg. It's a fun place to work. And I think it's a fun that I've shared with a lot of colleagues. We have a lot of people that has been working here for many years. And that can be great. I mean, that creates a very strong culture. You have a very, very experienced organization. But at the same time, it can also be a culture that sort of get a little bit stuck in some paradigms. And I think the cultural journey we've been on over the last almost 10 years is probably the one I'm most proud about, because I think that's the hard one. That's the difficult one. And it's also the journey where of patience. So I would have to say that looking back at the last 9-10 years, I mean, I'm mostly sort of proud of not really what you can see as a guest, but more what you can experience when you come here. Because I do think I took over a really good team, but I think today I have a world-class team, and that's it's not, of course, not just me. It's a collective effort, but that I'm very proud of my colleagues. I'm very proud of the people I work with. So that's probably what I'm most proud about.
Okay.
When it comes to mistakes or things I would have done differently, I think my biggest challenge as a leader is that I don't have a lot of patience. I sometimes I can be very patient. I can probably start too many projects at the same time. And I think that if you sort of look back at my first years, I think I wanted to do too much at the same time. And that does not always work, in a company that is as old as ours, but also, again, a company that has this very, very strong culture. So I was rebuilding the park, and I was reorganizing, and I was creating new brand platform, doing everything at the same time. And I think that looking back, I should probably have sort of like done things more in, you know, not in parallel, but maybe, you know, in a more planned manner. So having a little bit more patience is probably what I would have liked to have if I look back.
Okay.
It's really interesting. When you talk about the cultural journey and how that is, you know, something that you are most proud of, can you expand on what it was about that journey and what it looked like that really has, I would say, given you so much pride in what the last close to 10 years have looked like?
Well, I think that one of the challenges you have in a company like ours that has this very long heritage and again this very strong culture is that you sometimes you get a little bit fat and happy, if you know what I mean. It's you know we've been, you know, we've been doing quite well for a long time, and we probably, you know, we probably lost a little bit, you could say a guest focus, I would say. I think we were also sometimes a little bit too focused on the product, you know, the investments, the logistics, the, you know, the product itself, and not as much the guest or the guest experience. And I think that or I hope that we to some extent has sort of like changed that perspective at least a little bit. I wouldn't say we're there 100% because, you know, I fall into the same trap as you know, as everybody else, but I do yeah, I do feel that we've probably gotten a little bit more focused on the guest and the experience and the service delivery than we may have been in the past.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So Andreas, I want to, I guess, reference back to some of the things you talked about in the keynote, but there are things that obviously as an industry, we are all kind of working with and struggling with. And one of the things you talked about was animals in captivity and coming to terms with that. And is that the right thing to do? So I'm wondering if you can expand on some of your thoughts on that, just to kind of give people your perspective.
Well, I mean, I'm not in that part of our industry. So for what it's worth, I mean, this is of course my personal perspective. But I used it as an example to illustrate that sometimes we have to be very aware of the cultural changes that happens around us. I think that there's been a lot of cultural changes around or expectations around animal captivity for the last you know, maybe 5-8 years. And I think it's for me it's you know, it's again an illustration of the fact that if you're not listening to your guests, if you don't sort of have a sense of what their expectations are, you know, you could end up in trouble. And I think that having, you know, the discussion, for example, around blackfish. Let's take that as an example. You know, the documentary that I think it was from 2015 that portrayed, you know, certain activities at SeaWorld, you know, in a certain way. I think that the knee-jerk reaction is to look at the documentary and say, okay, it's biased, it's poor quality, it's you know, it's why, you know, we discuss the documentary, but the thing is that for me that's really the wrong discussion to have, because I think that the I think that the documentary was actually sort of it was a signal of something bigger happening around us, that guests, they do actually think it's problematic to have very large sea mammals in professional care. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying I think there's been shifting expectations. And you could argue the same thing with circuses. You know, that agenda has really driven a lot of circuits closed because you can't really travel with animals today as you did maybe 10 or 20 or 50 years ago. So I think there is something there that we have to be very, very aware of, and this is also why I'm always saying, if you want to have an animal attraction in the future, you have to be really, really good at answering the question why are we having the animals in captivity. And there might be really good reasons. It could be research, it can be that you're taking care of animals that otherwise would not be survive in the wild. I mean, there are a lot of good reasons to have these animals in captivity, but you have to be really good at answering that question. I think animals as entertainment is going to be quite problematic in the future if you can't answer that question why. That's how I see it.
I think that's a really good point, and I think that one of the key takeaways from that is that it's the change going on with the public perception and completely external is completely disconnected from how well the organization is, might be caring for the animals, or it could be completely two separate issues. So you use blackfish, for example, or we talk about animals in captivity, and the reaction, not even just from SeaWorld, but all zoos and aquariums really kind of drove this message of education, where I think that they tried their best to answer the question of why, but the answers may not have impacted people or the public opinion to say, oh, okay, never mind, we no longer have this issue or this opinion with it. So maybe the question is about balancing the social change that's happening externally with what decisions the organization should make, if they should be continuing as they are and trying to answer that question of why, or when it becomes time to start changing, even if it's against everything that the organization has not only done, but done very well for many decades.
No, and I think that's a very good point, because, if you take SeaWorld as an example, SeaWorld was in the zoo and aquarium industry known for world-class animal care. I mean, that they were sort of like one of the beacons of the industry. They did a fantastic job. But I'm not sure they were good enough at communicating this, because and I think it is difficult, because you're sort of like communicating rights and attractions at the same time as you're communicating animal welfare, and that's a difficult balance, but I think and we should not, we don't have to discuss SeaWorld as a case, but I think that if you have an animal attraction, or you have to really figure out whether you want to be a let's say, if you're having marine animals, if you're a marine themed attraction, because that's like one road to take, or if you are a animal attraction with you could say where you're really trying to be sort of a beacon of or in the forefront of animal care. But you kind of have to choose your road. I think it's difficult to be both, in my opinion.
Yeah. And you speak about animal care. I've been lucky enough to work with some aquariums and zoos, and you won't find anybody that cares more about the animals than the keepers and the people that actually work with them. So, just to talk about that SeaWorld thing just for another second, it was actually a little heartbreaking to hear people say that the animals weren't cared for, because that they actually are, but it's the story, right? And it's the why. And why do we have these animals in captivity? Is it just to jump through a hoop, or is it because we see the value of educating people to what this animal is and what it can do and how it impacts the environment? And that's one thing that I've felt, that as well as we take care of the animals, sometimes the environmental story isn't told well enough. How the animals, fare during a hurricane. We had somebody on from Lion Country Safari in Florida, and she said, the animals are we just kind of leave them out during a hurricane because they know what to do, right? And so there's that connection between animals and the environment that I think sometimes we as human beings have lost. So to me, that's one of the big impacts. And I'd love to have them, and not just SeaWorld, but I'd love to have those institutions tell that story a little bit more explicitly.
I agree. I totally agree.
Yeah. So we've been talking a lot about change. I think if we go back and listen so far, the word change has probably been used quite a bit. But you also said something recently about, we want to make sure that we're changing obviously responsibly, but there's a risk to not changing. So could you expand on that a little bit? What are the risks of not changing?
Well, again, when you work with consumer products, or consumer experiences, I think that there is, again, a very high risk if you're not being, if you're not listening, if you're not being adaptive. None of us really wants to end up like Kodak or Nokia or Olivetti, just to take three brands, three products that didn't really sort of like move with the changing demands from their consumers. So I think that the risk, is that if you're not really paying attention to the guests and to the trends in the marketplace you're working in, you can really end up in trouble. And therefore, I think, sure enough, when we invest or when we change the product we have, we're taking a commercial risk, absolutely. But sometimes the risk of not changing can be higher because if you're not adapting to again, changing behavioral expectations from your guests, you may end up in trouble. Mm-hmm. And I think that and it's interesting because I think children today, in sort of in the industrialized world, they're really working, or they use technology very differently than just maybe 10 or 20 years ago. And how does that impact the way they want to use us as an industry? I think is one of the things we're all thinking about. Is the competitive landscape changing? Do they have different expectations when they come visit us, et cetera, et cetera? So I think I think that, and I don't have the answers. I'm just, what I'm trying to say is just that I think it's really, really important to be very attentive, to what's going on around us, because otherwise, we may end up in trouble long term.
Yeah.
So what are the ways that we can be attentive and stay ahead of those cultural shifts that are happening around us to avoid the risk of not changing soon enough? And, I've got to imagine it's more than just watching the news or, setting up alerts for, new technology or, opinions, editorials, whatever it is. When you think of organizations like Uber or Netflix or Airbnb, like just the foresight that they had as far as what consumers might not be expressing today that they want, but in 5, 10, 20 years, whatever it is. I know most of those organizations haven't been around that long, but they're thinking faster than the world is moving, right?
I think it's a combination of things. I mean, I'm sure enough. I mean, short term, of course, it's really important that you understand, understand or you get the feedback from your guests, that you really have super control over everything that happens on social media, your exit polls, your mystery shopping, all those things. I mean, that's obviously that you really have to be very attentive there. But sort of the bigger picture trends, I think you probably will have to look for elsewhere. And it can be in other industries, and can be I spend a lot of time reading or surfing or just trying to figure out what happens in adjacent industries. I think one of the biggest impacts on our industry in the future will probably be retail, because the retail is really reshaping right now, And I think that a lot of retail in the future will be experience-based. And when it becomes experience-based, it will compete with us. It's very simple. So that's an area where I spend a lot of time sort of like figuring out what is happening in the retail market right now, because it can have an impact on us. But I mean, there are also other, you could say, again, macro long-term trends that can impact, impact the way we make decisions today. I can give you a kind of fun example that illustrates. We're building a new hotel and an indoor water park, and as part of that project, we have to build a parking garage. And there are sort of two things that came up when we were trying to design or plan for this parking garage. The first thing was that the whole cars, it's probably the same in North America, but here in Sweden, more and more cars are electric. And in the future, a parking garage will not just serve as a storage for cars, but it will also be a gas station. And it means that physically you have to prepare to have a plug for every parking space, but it also impacts the whole business model of parking, because if you can put gas on or electricity on a car while it's there, I mean there are other ways, revenue streams, and how do you package the whole the business model of parking. So that's one example that illustrates how do you prepare for that in sort of in the medium term. The other perspective is a bit more difficult, and that has to do with autonomous vehicles. Here in Gothenburg, this is Volvo City, and there's a huge automotive industry here in Gothenburg, and these autonomous vehicles, they're really here already. I mean, you're seeing them, you're experiencing them, they become more and more apparent in your, you could say, daily life. And one of the studies that I was sort of a future studies that I read said that a child born in Sweden today will not get a driver's license, because when that person or that child is 16 or 18, most vehicles will be autonomous. And how does that impact the business model of parking? Because if you have autonomous cars, you don't really need your own car. And do you need a parking garage, or do you need a storage facility? I mean, it just impacts the way you have to think about a project like that. So again, how do you prepare medium term for that car construction, but also how long do you depreciate a project like that over? Because would there be a need for a parking garage in 20 years? I don't know, but it illustrates how difficult it can be to navigate in these macro trends, basically.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's really interesting when you talk about the parking garage that is also sort of a gas station or a charging station, because, excuse me, in the past, when you pay for parking someplace, you're paying for air, essentially, right? You're paying for a place to store your car. Now, at least you're paying for an opportunity to charge your car. So I could see, like you talked about, with different revenue opportunities, I could see that definitely playing in. But I also want to go back to the retail piece that you talked about, because I wholeheartedly agree that as retail comes back, right, and they become more of an experience and more entertainment based, that there will be a competition with other location based options. So would that make sense for amusement operators, theme park operators, to kind of get ahead of that trend and be the ones that are developing the retail spaces that are also kind of part of their themed experience, if you will?
Yeah, I don't know if it's I don't know if it's on us or it's on the retail sector. I mean, I attended the large retail property conference last year in Cannes called MAPIC, and it was very evident that everybody in the property sector or the retail property sector, they're looking for somebody like us. You know, they're looking for content, they're looking for experiences, they're looking for programming of, you know, both high streets and shopping centers. Because they understand that this drives traffic, and you know, it gives you, you know, even though adding a FEC or more restaurants or more, you could say, experience-based retail concepts in your mix may not be profitable in itself. It adds to sort of the synergy, the whole you could say business model of retail in that location. So I think that whether we're gonna move into that sector or we're being pulled into that sector, I don't know, but obviously I think a lot of things are going to happen. I had a conversation with one of the biggest real estate brokers in Scandinavia last year, well, this year maybe, about it, and he said that within the next 10 years 50% of all leases on high streets will be experience-based. And again, experience-based in a broad sense, it could be restaurants, but it can also be attractions, or it can be, you know, it can be whatever, but 50% will be experience-based. And I think that you know, that will impact us, you know, whether we move into that arena or whether we compete with that arena.
Mm-hmm.
That's really interesting, because if you think about it, as far as today, that seems unfathomable, just anything being experience based just in the world we're living in right now. So that obviously I would say is a very optimistic view that not only will things eventually go back to normal, but will be better than normal, at least from, you know, from a consumer standpoint, and from those, whether they're competing with the amusement industry or not, that, you know, experiences are definitely not going anywhere, but if anything, are about to get a surge in renaissance.
Yeah, I think I believe in that renaissance, that surge. I think we will.
Yeah. One of the things that that you also mentioned in the keynote, which I know we keep going back to, was that you're in the process of developing Liseberg's long-term plan. I think you said 10, 20, and I know you said 30-year strategic plan. And 30 years from now seems so far into the future, but also if I think about it, we're closer to 2050 than we are to 1990. So maybe it's actually not that far away. But what are some of the inputs that go into a 30-year strategic plan? I know you mentioned probably some examples as far as, you know, how your thinking is changing around building a parking garage and what vehicles are going to look like. But what else is going into, or what are other factors for consideration for a 30-year plan?
I think the headline is flexibility, basically, and that's really, you know, when we talk about, you know, doing planning for the next generation, it's really about creating flexibility, because we don't know what comes after. So sure enough, I mean, when we do have planning permissions, or we have a dialogue with the authorities about how the park would look in 20, 30, 40 years, the answer we give them is really, we don't know. You know, we don't know what the business model will look like in 20 years. We don't know whether, you know, I mean, I'll give you an example. We are a park that is located in the city center of Gothenburg. We are gated. I mean, you have to pay an entrance fee to get in. And we actually operate very much like a regular amusement park. You know, it's a pretty basic model. We're now adding a hotel, we're adding a water park, and Volvo is building a new experience center on land we just sold them next door to the park. But with that development, and you could say also with the competitive landscape changing when it comes to, for example, retail, the question is, are we in the future going to be a gated park, or will we be more like a neighborhood? You know, are we going to be a place where you buy a ticket, you get in, you may visit us twice a year, or will we be a much more integrated part of the cityscape, or the city life than we are today? I don't know, but I think it is sort of it's a good question to ask yourself, and that does impact the way you create the framework for future plans. And that's why, when we've been working with these long-term plans, the header, the main objective has been to really create something that is as flexible as possible, because I'm not going to be here in 20 years or 30 years. I just want to make sure that the people coming after me or after us, they have all the tools as much tools in the toolbox as possible to make sure that the product is adapted to the reality they're operating in when that time comes.
That is so interesting. And when you started talking about the park being sort of the fabric of the neighborhood, that would make me want to move right next to the park. Right? If that was like my neighborhood park, man, I would love that. As an enthusiast, that would be someplace to go take an afternoon stroll, or, go on, one ride here or there. I think that would be really, really, really interesting. So in preparation for our time with you today, we put out on social media that we were going to be interviewing you, and we had a couple of people, ask questions that we could ask you. So if you're open to it, we've got a couple of those questions that we'd love to go ahead and ask right now. So the first one comes from Adam Sandy, and he says, how does the park entice guests that live in a digital world with analog thrills? And you kind of talked about this a little bit, but what is the next balance between the two worlds in the theme park environment?
Well, I think the answer is that well, I have to say, this is my very personal perspective on it, because somebody else may have a completely different view, but I think the answer is don't. Because I think that what is our competitive edge in this highly digitized world? What can we do differently than what you can do at home or in shopping mall? It is those very immersive physical experiences. Whether it's listening to live music, or whether it's being turned upside down on a ride, or whether it's experiencing the sense of weightlessness, or being with people in real life and not just on Zoom. So I actually think there is a value to doing things sort of the old-fashioned way. That being said, sure enough, the digital realm or the digital world will have to be integrated in a much more intricate way. I think one of the things that we're discussing right now is the future of concerts. We have a lot of concerts at Liseberg every year, with both Swedish names and international names, and one of the questions we're trying to answer is, will we ever have a concert in the park again that is not in some way of a hybrid, where you can visit it, in real life if you want to do that, but you can also experience it from your own, from home or with your family, and creating that new hybrid concert business model is sort of an interesting discussion. I can't say that we figured this one out, but I do think it's an interesting question to investigate. So I think adding a digital layer to the experience, definitely, and making sure that all the boring logistics of visiting a park, whether it's queuing or buying a ticket or reserving a table at a restaurant, if you can do everything like all these things on your mobile, that's great. But I think the core of the product is still, for me, a non-digital experience.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's That's great to hear that, of being able to combine those two, but at the core being non-digital. Another question that we got was from Marcus Gaines, and this goes back to you mentioning at the beginning that you're one of those crazy nerds, your words, not ours. And Marcus asks, as a self-proclaimed roller coaster enthusiast, and ignoring what is at Liseberg, what is your favorite coaster in the world?
Oh, I don't know. I have so many. That's the problem. You know, I don't know. The thing is also I've gotten really old, you know, and I can't do what I did, you know, 20 or 30 years ago. I mean, I you know, I remember the days when I could go to Busch Gardens and go on Montu and just ride it for 3 hours straight, and you know, and today I'm a little bit of a, yeah, I'm not, I don't have the strength anymore. Well, what favorite ride? I don't know. I really yeah, I actually don't know. I like most coasters, to be frank. Well, not all of them, but
yeah. So as an enthusiast question, you don't have to pick one specific, but do you prefer wooden or steel?
Steel, probably. Yeah. You know, I grew up with a Tivoli. You have one of the oldest wooden coasters in the world. It's from 1914. And there's actually quite a fun story. When 20 years ago, when my grandmother died, we found a building set in her attic with that was a coaster built out of old wooden cigar boxes and you know tin cans. So she had in her attic a fully working wooden coaster from 1915 that my great-grandfather had built. Sometimes I think maybe it's in the genes, you know, maybe it's not just, you know, maybe I actually inherited this interest from somebody. So I actually should answer wooden coasters because it's a very integrated part of my background. But I do like really good steel coasters, I have to say.
Yeah.
Nice. So then actually this ties into one of the last questions that we have for you. And this is for you to expand on a quote that you mentioned. And that's that you said, it's not a near-death experience, it's a near-life experience. What does that mean?
Well, you know, when you have a thrill ride, you know, when you have you know, we have a 160-meter tall, 400-foot freefall tower, for example. And basically when you go on that ride, you know, and you're being dropped from 400 feet, you know, that your whole body just screams, this is not right. You know, and it's, you know, it's this fight or flight, you know, all these hormones are being released, you know, adrenaline and cortisol and endorphins, because your whole body, your whole system is just being really stressed. And your body really thinks it is a near-death experience, but in fact it's the opposite. You know, it is the near life, because you're being, you know, I think it's, you know, I there was some research done in the 90s by some psychologists that actually looked at the, you know, how thrill rides impact your not just your mental health but your physical health. And they talked about that you get a hormone shower, you know, when you do a thrill ride, because all these hormones are being released, and that's actually very helpful. That's very healthy in today's today's world, where we go and build up all these stress hormones, and we're it's you know, it's not easy living, you know, in these times, and there I actually think that this release, you know, this sort of back to basics, a way of playing with your senses, playing with your body, I actually think it can be very, very healthy. And I think it is actually, in fact, a meal life experience.
So I just wrote down thrill rides are good for your health. So
yes,
I wrote it down too. Anyone that challenges our obsession and our passion, that's a quick return, a good rebuttal for it.
That's right.
So, awesome. Well, Andreas, as we wind this down here, this was a fantastic conversation. We're so appreciative of your time today. If people want to learn more about Liseberg, if they want to say hi to you directly, where would you send them?
I actually have a blog, which is called Liseberg Reflections. I kind of updated, but shoot me an email. I'm not that difficult to find. Or on LinkedIn. That's also an option.
Great. We'll include those in the show notes. So as we wrap this up, any final messages, any words of wisdom for our audience?
I don't know. I mean, I think if we sort of go back to where we started, and how are we feeling? I think we're all feeling, a little bit, I think there's a little bit of anxiety going on here, because I think it's been a strange year for all of us, as individuals, as companies, as an industry. But I'm quite optimistic. I think we're gonna pull through this. I think the attractions industry has always been hit hardest when you have events like this. Whether it's now it's a pandemic, but we've also experienced financial crisis and terror attacks and all that, and we always get really hard hit, but we also rebound really quickly. And I'm actually quite optimistic. We're gonna pull through this one.
Well, I can't think of a better way to encapsulate our conversation than with your optimism. So thank you so much for your time today, Andreas. We really do appreciate it. And for everybody out there watching and listening, just remember, we are all Attraction Pros. Thanks for listening to the Attraction Pros podcast.
Make sure to subscribe so you can tune in when new episodes release. And even better, please leave us a review on iTunes.
For more information, visit attractionpros.com.